G'day, g'day, wherever you are in this wonderful world. This is Mastering Music, Mastering Life. I'm Tony Jack the Bear Manson. I'm here at my own place, Deluxe Mastering in Melbourne, Australia, my beautiful hometown. And today it is my absolute pleasure to be able to have a chat and enjoy a conversation with a gentleman who I have had the pleasure of knowing for quite a long time now. He's one of the best in the business. He's one of the nicest guys in the universe. He's very knowledgeable, and we're going to have a really insightful chat. So would you please welcome my wonderful friend, Brad Blackwood from Euphonic Masters in Memphis, Tennessee, the home of rock and roll. Brad, welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. Good to be here. Pleasure.
Good to see you, my friend. It has taken a little while for us to get to this point, but all good things do take time, and delighted to finally connect with you, my friend, and get some of your time, because you're one of the busiest master engineers I know. So it's good to track you down. So how are things at Euphonic Masters these days?
Things are great. Just humming along. We've kind of been rolling along at this pace for a number of years now. It just kind of keeps me busy. I only go 5 days a week. I don't work weekends. So, Monday through Friday, I'm pretty much going 90 to nothing all day long until I can get done. So
that's great. Well, you're one of those, there are some engineers that kind of have this almost, I don't know if the word is charmed journey, but there are some guys though who kind of have these incredible starts. They land at these places and they just have these wonderful kind of careers. Chris Athens is another one of those guys that comes to mind, starting, I think, the Sony back in the day with Mark Wilder, and, just getting that wonderful start right from the beginning. And you, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Arden Studios, Terry Manning's place, where you began your career.
Yeah, John Fry was actually the owner of Arden Studios and the founder until he passed about 3 years ago now. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, amazing engineer. And under his tutelage or under his care, quite a few amazing engineers came through there. Terry Manning was one of the guys that worked there for a number of years and helped put Ardent on the map with the massive number of hit records that he did there. But there was, Joe Hardy and John Hampton and Paul Eversold and Skid Mills. The list is just ridiculously long of really talented engineers that came through there and learned under John, him teaching us, how to listen, kind of how to do things. And then we do our own thing with it. But he was a pretty amazing impact on a tremendous number of careers. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about anyone when you're young and you are under the tutelage or mentorship of really good guys, good operators. It's like a plant, when you, a seed that's in good soil and fertilized right and watered right has the best chance to grow and then produce itself.
Yeah. I mean, I tell when new guys reach out to me or young guys getting into the industry reach out to me, that's one of the things I always tell them without fail. Try to find a really established engineer that you can learn from, because there are guys out there that have been successful that kind of DIY'd their way to it, but a vast majority of the really successful engineers out there kind of started the same way. They got on at a successful place. They learned under really accomplished guys, and you pick up so much about not just the audio engineering stuff. It's interfacing with clients. It's things like that. Just the little things that go along with it, beyond just twisting knobs, that you pick up so much of day to day, just being around these people.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things I find though with a lot of young cats who, as you said, you can successfully DIY, I think feel a little intimidated by approaching, engineers that they like or respect, but I think in this day and age, most people, I would tell, are fairly open. I mean, that may not necessarily be able to get back to you immediately, but I remember Phil Demetro a couple of podcasts ago said when he first approached Tom Coyne, who, Tom, bless his soul, one of the upper echelon guys, responded back by almost like going, really? Like he was humbled by the fact that anyone would even care to contact him. And I think that most guys, I keep encouraging young guys, look, those established people, remember what it was like to be in your position. And I know that you're one of those guys, Brad, and you're a champion of giving, and you helped me a lot too. So for the record, like when I started my own thing, we had a lot of talk when we first got to know each other, and you were very instrumental in offering me great input and advice, and occasionally would kick my butt when needed. So thanks for that, Matt. I'm just publicly acknowledging that.
Thank
so
you. It's also to quick.
sorry, mate. Come again.
I can't take full credit there.
Oh no, but again, I think that again, it's a team effort. I think that it's an ongoing learning process. So anyway, mate. So
I'm sorry, but with social media the way it is now too, engineers are more accessible than ever. I mean, ever before. It may be difficult to find a Rick Rubin, or a Mutt Lang. You're going to have a difficulty connecting with those guys because they have to have that wall there. But for engineers like us, it's easy, man. You can find us everywhere, and there's especially even the really high end guys that you're talking, like the Tom Coynes of the world. Even those guys are really accessible now. And 20 years ago, before the internet, it'd be much more difficult to get in touch with them than it is now. So yeah, I encourage young guys, find somebody you really want to learn from and talk to them. The worst thing that can happen is they go, not right now.
Yeah. So you left Arden and you started your little setup, as most of us guys did, in a humble surrounds. And so you made a break for it. And tell us about what was it like in those days, starting out, and what inspired you to go out and set up your own shingle and do your thing.
Well, it was a leap of faith, really. It was, I felt like I'd kind of hit the wall with what I could accomplish with regards to not only growth, but also with what I could offer my clients at Ardent, because Ardent is primarily a recording mixing studio. That's what it is. It's multiple rooms, so on and so forth. And they had a room that was dedicated, for me, and we were building and so on and so forth. But it was like baby steps, getting things done there. And I'm kind of the type that when I decide I want to do something, then let's go, let's do it. Let's plan it out. Let's execute it. Let's go. And I finally got to the point where I thought, well, I could stay here another X number of years and probably get the studio where I wanted it, or I can go out and just be my own boss. But I was really worried because, even though I had a few, successful records under my belt and was sort of, quasi developing a name back in 2003, I was really kind of worried that if I left, that most of my clients would find some other place, or they'd stay with somebody at Ardent or something, because I figured it was the Ardent name that people were using before. But I was pleasantly surprised that just as soon as I opened the doors, basically, of Euphonic, it picked up like it had never stopped. It just rolled right along. So it was really sort of like me trying to do more, for the clients and for myself. And it's been like a fairy tale since then, honestly. It's just right out of the gate, it was successful, and we've been going gangbusters ever since.
Yeah, you have. You're one of the most consistently busy guys that I know of, and good on you, mate. No testament to you. I think people don't fully appreciate just the work it takes to set up your own shop. There's a lot of risk involved. There's ups and there's downs, and so for you, what do you think are the attributes that would make, so some young person right now is considering setting up their own shop? What do you think are the, maybe not necessarily in order of importance, but certainly the non-negotiables that someone would need in order for them to be successful in this business, audio generally speaking?
I think you have to be, well, it's hard for me to speak into that because, there's so many people who are wired so differently who have all tasted success. So for me, I think the important characteristics have been sort of an insatiable thirst to learn and figure out new, ways to do things, or ways to do things better, or more efficiently. Efficiency is a really big deal to me. Has always been that way. I feel like the quicker that I can work, it's not just that you can do more work. More importantly, that's less time that I spend sort of losing my objectivity when I'm working on a song. If I listen to it 20 times, there's a lot of things that are going to start sounding normal, even if they should be fixed or addressed. But I think it's that thirst, that quest for knowledge and learning as much as you can about every aspect of it. Because, I learned a lot about analog stuff because that's kind of the era that I grew up in. And then during my career, digital has kind of become the prominent format of recording, at least in editing, but also in a lot of processing. And so I've had to learn a lot about that as well. And I just think that constantly trying to evolve and grow and stay current with what's going on if you're hungry enough and trying, that's going to be a huge attribute towards keeping you successful long term.
Yeah, I think it's important. One of the things that was big for me as a youngster was because a lot of my learning came from doing in the 80s. I was a bit of a studio rat, and I got to just hang out at all these different places. So I never, I never did an internship in the classic sense. And for a long period of time, it was a big part of my, because I felt this imposter syndrome for many years. And part of that, I'm pleased to say I don't feel like I'm an imposter anymore. But right up until maybe late last year, I seriously felt that. And a big part of that was the fact that, unlike a lot of my colleagues who had gone through the system of the classic 2-3 year internship and whatnot, I just had a sporadic thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that the one thing that really got in deep to me, and I'm grateful for it, is, and I think this is probably a big part of the American way of doing things, was this whole idea that that I was involved in the service industry, and it was a people business. And while gear and ears and sensitivity to music and all that, but the ability to, again, psychology 101, understanding people, empathy for people, service for people, and understanding that I was not the artist, and I was not, there's a creative element to doing this job, but it is a service industry. And so it was about them and you facilitating a process to realize their vision. And Rick Essig, who was my first and great mentor he taught me how to cut lacquers at Frankfurt Wayne, New York. And he said to me, 80% of this job is bullshit, son. So, and by that, I think he just meant it was the hang time, the ability to be able to be around people and have that connection.
Sure, absolutely. And, I think that a lot of people lose sight of that it's a client-oriented business. We're not really that much different than a restaurant. They have to enjoy the food, but they also have to, if you get crappy service, you're not going to go back to that restaurant most likely. You'll find somebody else that also has good food. And also, I'm not going to tell you how you like your steak. You're going to get your steak the way you want it, whether I agree with that way or not. And I've known a few guys that were really almost had some animosity towards their clients at times. You could tell they'll post things on social media, which I can't believe anyone would ever even do that, blasting a client, And I just think that we have to treat it like it's service industry. Like you said, this is like a restaurant or a shop, and you want as many clients. And we've got a very small client base to choose from, which is what you'll never see me posting something about how this artist sucks. Even if it's somebody that I don't really care for their music. Because, man, I never know if the next day the phone's going to ring and it's going to be that manager saying, hey, we want you to do our record, And so
yeah,
you got to be real careful and realize that it's a small market relative to other businesses, and you got to take care of people.
No, definitely. And I think successful in inverted commas for me, I think are the guys who are able also to handle a wide variety. Some people, because of certain success with certain artists, may get pigeonholed, and maybe America's one of those places where you can probably afford that. As an example, Ted Jensen, who I'm sure could brilliantly master anything, whether it's a classical or jazz or a folk or a pop or a blues or a hip hop or whatever record. But but he's mainly known for doing the heavy rock, metal kind of records, and the market's big enough over there where Ted could live 3 lifetimes and still be doing rock records, but guys like like Ludwig, for example, who isn't necessarily known for a specific style, but he's that to me is where I think it's successful, and I think that's what gives longevity to people. And so you mainly do a lot of rock records, right? Because I mean, from your part of the world, it's predominantly rock and blues and folk.
That's been I would say, yeah, half or more of the work is that, but it's not all that. I do quite a bit of acoustic stuff and, lighter stuff. I probably, 75-80% even probably would fall under rock, whether that's heavy stuff or lighter rock, pop rock kind of stuff.
Yeah. What's life like in Memphis, Brad? Tell us about life in Memphis.
Right now it's miserably cold, which is unseasonable for us, but it's like below freezing here, and we had a little bit of snow today, which is very unusual. And but overall, I like it. I love this city. It's got real soul to it. Some of the other cities that are around us that are music cities feel a little plastic in comparison to me. So I love the vibe here. It's not without its problems. Memphis has got a lot of major social issues, and not a lot of hope on the horizon at times. But I do love it here. I love this place, and I love the people in the city.
I've never been to Memphis. I've been to Nashville. It was a long time ago. But I was actually quite surprised how well Nashville, traditionally known as the country, and bluegrass and roots and whatnot. But I was pleasantly surprised actually how diverse. And I'm talking like I think it was 2000 or something around there. How diverse the city was. But Nashville seems like it's really diversified quite more since then as a city musically.
Sure. It's grown mad. Something like 100 new residents a day are moving into Nashville right now on average. It's crazy, the growth and expansion. And of course, a lot of that is studio guys. I know a ton of guys from like LA and New York that have relocated. Of course, Sterling just built 2 new rooms there, 2 full-size rooms. I think there's also a smaller room in their facility as well. So it's being recognized. It's sort of the new anchor point, I think, of the music industry right now. Is just up the road from us.
So I'm not one that understands American politics, and I'm not a political person in general. But I couldn't help but notice just on Facebook now. Again, there's been the impression I get is that there's been a big movement because voting over there is, as I understand it, it's optional. It's not compulsory like it is here in this country, and there's been a lot of encouragement of young people to enroll, to vote. There seems to be. So how do you sense the mood in America right now in terms of just the feeling of the people and the political climate? And do you feel there's optimism, or do you feel there's pessimism? Or, like, what's your take on it with things over there?
I'm largely apolitical. I try not to get too involved in it. I mean, I'm involved in politics with regards to studying up on things before I vote, so I know who I'm voting for and those sorts of things. And of course, I do vote most of the time too. But it feels to me as politically divided as it's ever been. I don't have a lot of optimism that it's going to get any better anytime soon. I hear ignorant spoutings from people on both sides of the aisle kind of nonstop. We're a 2-party system predominantly here. I don't know what your political system's like, but
similar. Yeah.
And so it seems like it's either one or the other, and there's hardly anybody that's willing to kind of shake hands and give a little in order to get things done. It's just calling names and things like that. And it's really pushed a lot of people, I think, like myself, even further from the political realm of not wanting to even be involved in it at all. And so I don't discuss politics on Facebook. I don't talk about it with friends and family and stuff, just because it just seems like people are so wound so tightly right now about it. You could say one thing that they disagree with, and it just turns into this explosion of frustration and anger, and it's just not worth it to me.
Yeah. Well, they say what religion and politics, but I think even in general, I think that with any subject matter, it's very difficult to grow and learn unless I think it's important to have an opinion. I think it's important to stand for something, but I also think it's important that we are able to. And again, I'm a very late bloomer in life here, Brad Blackwood. So please don't think, or anyone listening think that I'm, being some kind of all-knowing sage. But as a late bloomer, I've learned that the more open I can be to hearing what other people are saying and taking it on board, because there are times in my life where I've had to say I was wrong. And I think as we get older, that's a much harder thing, bigger pill to swallow. And one example of that is internet forums. The way I conducted myself in internet forums a few years ago is completely different and changed because I had to get pulled up and I had to change. But I've got friends from all kind of political backgrounds and religious persuasions, and I find I always learn something. I think being open-minded doesn't necessarily mean I'm putting my hand up to be a candidate to sign up for your team, but fear is just something from ignorance and lack of knowledge. And the more we get to know about whatever it is, just an understanding, we don't necessarily have to condone or be a part of it. But the more I know about you and your culture, your thing, the less I have to fear, and then the less name calling and stuff goes on. That's my theory anyway.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't do it, is because it's easier for me to get to know people, and I have great friends who voted for Republicans, and I have great friends who voted for Democrats, and I love and respect each of those people for various reasons. And when you know people and you know why they support this candidate or that candidate, like you said, I mean, you understand there's more. It's not just this superficial go team thing. People have real feelings as to why they feel this way and that way, and you get to know those things. You learn more about them and their beliefs, and that's literally because I know so many people from both sides of the aisle and love and respect them. That's the reason why I just choose not to really, especially on Facebook. I think it's the worst possible format to discuss something that's nuanced and not just black and white.
Most definitely. Now, speaking of Go Team, that segues beautifully into one of your passions, which is American college football, something that I know very little about. So tell us about your love of football and help me. One of the things I do respect the athleticism required to be, to play football, especially if you're a linebacker, to be 200 plus pounds and to run 100 yards in 3 seconds flat and whatnot. But the one thing, the idea of having a complete team for the offense and a complete team for the defense, like for me, the whole idea is, how long does a game of football go for? Is it 100 minutes? How many minutes of playing time is there?
It's 60 minutes of playing time, but the game will take, with timeouts and things like that. It's not uncommon for it to last 3 hours.
Okay. So what is it about American football that makes it so interesting or intriguing, or that captivates the American public so much?
On a very simple level, I think it's just something that people grow up. It is the big sport here and has been for a long time. So on the most simple or superficial level, I think it's just, that's the way people grow up. They grow up watching football with their family, and that's just by and large, not everybody. But those of us who really become passionate about it, one of the things you start to realize the more you dig into it is how deep the sport is, and the amount of knowledge that it requires to really understand it at the deepest level. It's a lot. I mean, I equate it to chess a lot of times, which makes people laugh because you think, well, it's a bunch of dudes running on bashing their heads in, which is kind of the opposite of the cerebral aspect of chess. But it really is, because in football you have, 22 guys on the field, and each one of them is a specialist at their particular thing. I mean, you see, we'll talk about 5 offensive linemen, but each one of those guys plays a specific role, and their job is very different. The left guard's job is very different from the center or from the left tackle's job, and things like that. So they're very specific in the way they train for that exact job. But then the thing about football that really intrigues me is that every time the ball is snapped, every time a play is played, you've got 22 guys, and basically every one of those guys has to execute their job well. Because if any one guy does not, that can lead to a score, literally on that one play, just like that. And I can't think of another sport that requires, on every single play, every single man on the field to do that. Whether, I played soccer growing up, I played a little bit of rugby when I was in college, things like that. And all those sports are fun and unique and things like that, but they're a lot more individualized, like basketball is in the U.S., for example. Mm-hmm. It's the guy with the ball is really kind of the guy, and everybody else is supporting him at that point. And in football, it's a little different than that. It takes all the guys on the field literally have to perform on every play. And when that one guy doesn't, or if he gets beat, that's when you see something happen, whether it's a tackle in the backfield or an opening for a running back to run through, or a pass down the field, or whatever. So it's a lot more cerebral, I think, than a lot of people understand. And of course, if you're not from the U.S., you think, well, what's the big deal? Because you probably don't get to see it very much at all. But the intriguing thing for me is that there's a lot more thought that goes into it, a lot more than just a bunch of big guys lining up, beating on each other. Well,
that's what I'm starting to see slowly. I've over here in Australia, obviously, we get to see the Super Bowl games and the series. It's slowly, there's been a slower uptake on it. Obviously, we have our own code of football, which is completely different, and I imagine just as intriguing and amusing, I guess, to other people outside of our culture. But I've just always known you to be a football fan, and I don't think I'll ever become a convert of NFL, but I am learning to slowly respect it more and for what it is. And hopefully over time, one day I'll be able to sit down and for the 7 or 8 hours it takes. Or no, I'm being facetious here. But, yeah. Well, listen, mate, we can't listen. We have cricket over here, and Test cricket is 5 days. Okay, so
yeah. And you can't complain about 3 hours.
Yeah. So so we, glass houses and stones and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, as it is. So, mate, are you still hiking? There was a time you were hiking a lot. Are you still?
Well, it's not really hiking. It's it's called rucking.
So your T-shirt grow ruck. I can see your T-shirt.
This is from an event that we did. Rucking it's from the military. Anybody who's been in the military, I did not serve in the military, but anyone who's been in it has done some rucking, no matter what country you're from. That's your big, heavy, usually an Alice pack on your back, and you're walking with a purpose, as they call it. So it's usually a 15 or sub 15 minute mile with this weighted pack, anywhere from 45 to 60 pounds. It's work. It's constant resistance training. And I got into it, a while back, and there's specific types of backpacks you can buy that have slots in them for metal weights and things like that. And that's become a real kind of passion of mine. I enjoy doing these long rucks with this weight on the back. It's an endurance event, but it's, also resistance training.
And yeah, because I know you're a guy that likes going out into nature. You're big on your Toyota. You're a Toyota truck man.
Yes, I am.
You're a bit of an enthusiast.
Yes.
So you try to get out a bit, I assume, and do you hunt and fish? Do you hunt and fish and stuff like that, or is it just
hunting and fishing? That's not really in my wheelhouse, if you will. But I love off-roading. There's a lot of trails around here. You can get over into Arkansas. There's some beautiful mountainous trails over there that are made for off-roading. Go driving up there for a few days, camp out at night under the stars. It's pretty awesome. It's a good way to get away and just completely disconnect from the world that we live in. That's so connected.
Absolutely. I think it's important that we get ourselves away from, as much as I enjoy mastering and I enjoy mentoring, I think just in the realm of work, shall we say, loosely based work, it's good to get away to nature, because we have lost our sense and connection to it. You're lucky, man, because you're right, it's virtually in your backyard, right, where you are?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
you're really close to it.
I can drive a couple of hours and be where there's no cell signal, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's important to to get. So I just want to go on a tangent real quick. I want to talk to you a little bit about a guy who's passed. Someone that I never had the pleasure as you did of working with him and his music, but I did get to know him, and that's our dear friend, the late great Mike Shipley. Tell us about how you and Mike got together and the work you did with Mike, and what were your memories of him when you guys got to talk and work together.
Yeah, Mike was, he was an astonishing guy. I mean, I really count myself lucky to have gotten to work with him and become really good friends with him over the course of the years. Interestingly enough, back in 2003 or so, when I started Euphonic, on the old Gear Sluts, well, I guess it's still there, they had a chat. It was a little separate app that ran, that was the Gear Sluts chat. And I sponsored that I had Euphonic sponsor that for, I don't know, a couple of years, if I remember correctly. It was just because I knew that was a lot of people that would be my clients or needed to know that I was no longer at Ardent. That was one place they might be. It had already taken off and it was doing fairly well as a forum. And so I would sponsor the chat. So because of that, I was on the chat quite a bit. I just hung out. I would leave the little window up all day long while I was working and things like that. And several times Mike logged on to the chat, and there was a group of guys there that we all got to know each other. We still actually hang out and talk now. It's fun. But he came on and complained one time about, he had just gotten this record back from this ex-famous engineer. And it was terrible. It was too loud. It was distorting. It was all this kind of so on and so forth. And several guys says, hey, you should try Brad, And that's literally how I got my first gig with Mike Shipley. He contacted me the next day and said, hey, I want you to master a song for me. And I did, and he loved it, and basically used me almost exclusively when it was his choice. Obviously, he didn't have the choice every time, but when he had the call, he used me exclusively then from there on out, basically until he passed. So got to do a bunch of really, really good records, and that guy it was really neat because I would almost get giddy every time I got to work with him. It was because I grew up. I mean, all through the '80s, like half the records that I loved, just that was Mike Shipley's work. And then getting to work with this guy, and he was so humble. I mean, he was this guy that would send me work, and I would master it, and he would call me like 8 times during the session. How's it going? Is it terrible? Is it? And you know, as soon as you hit play, it's like it just sounds like it's done. It's incredible. And he was so worried that, you know, it wasn't good enough and this, that, and the other. It was really remarkable, his humility, but always a pleasure working with him. He's just such a genuine person. I loved Mike a lot.
Yeah, I agree. The first time I ever spoke with him, it was similar thing. It's just and this is something that I've found to be fairly consistent amongst the guys who I've respected. I'm grateful for it, because we have a perception of people that we don't know or meet. We just kind of have an idea. And if we get the opportunity to meet them or speak with them or have some contact, and then they not only meet but exceed those expectations, I've always found those guys at the upper echelon, generally speaking, were humble, and again, this sense of self-doubt about, like you said, Mike would call the time, and you think, hang on a minute, I mean, you're Mutt Lang's boy. You've done this and this and this. How could you not have a sense of this confidence about yourself that you're always self-doubting? You know? And I was, and I felt the same thing. And I mean, I never got to work with Mike. I never got to master not even a note of what he ever worked on, but we had a lot of great conversations. And and the last time I spoke to him, not too soon before he passed, it was a very eerie conversation. He always struck me as just a lot of he carried a lot. Let's just put it that way. He just carried a lot, and I think in our industry, you know, the mental health thing is so big, and people that we see who have tremendous profile or prestige, we're unaware. You know, I mean, that's a veneer, and social media, I think, also exacerbates that. But yeah, I think a lot of people would be surprised as to just how many people out there are hurting and feeling it and are going through a lot of stuff that we all go through, but we're just unaware of it because of the veneer. So,
well, and I think it's compounded. I think it's compounded by the fact that while the industry has always been competitive, it's probably more so now in a lot of ways than it's ever been. At least when you're talking about the high budget, you know, kind of upper echelon major label work, which is what Mike was. That's about all he did. It makes it really difficult when you feel like you've got to be on your game all the time, and you can't show any weakness or anything. That was the vibe that I got. That, you know, that he really struggled with that, and that's kind of sad that you have to have that veneer of like, I'm invincible. I'm all this kind of stuff, and you can't show your humanity in those times for fear that somebody's going to think, well, he's mentally weak, or who knows what's going to happen, so we might as well go with this other guy. And that's how he felt. Whether that's, yeah, I'm assuming that's accurate. He's knee deep in it.
I think there was definitely an element of that, and also a lot of the fact that, you know, with his mother being here in Melbourne, and I think there was a lot of guilt. I guess the fact that, you know, the fact that he spent so much time away with his mother, and you know, his mother's getting old and wanted to take care of her, and you know, and sometimes we realize that, you know, success in life, we look at a guy like Mike or a similar person and think, oh, wow, they must be so happy. Look, they're hanging out with rock stars, and they got gold and platinum records, and they're on the red carpet. And yet it's not where the true happiness lies in life. These things are great, but, you know, it's not fulfilling, not necessarily fulfilling.
I mean, people tend to forget that, like, everybody is the same. I don't care if you're Mike Shipley or you're some, you know, somebody that's living in some war-torn area of the world. All people want is, you know, some level of comfort. They want safety. They want, you know, good things for their children. They want to have good, healthy food and water. They just, you know, people just want basic good stuff. If people have just basic good stuff, they're happy. But they also have the same problems. They have the same issues. You have sick children. You have sick wives or parents. You have all these things. And it doesn't matter how many, like you said, how many records, how many awards you've got that, you know. And so it's easy to elevate these people and act like, yeah, they've got it all figured out, but they live life just like everybody else does. They have the same problems everybody else does. and they've got to deal with it too. Unfortunately, some people do that better than others.
Yeah. One of the great lessons for me that last year really struck me, Brad, was a guy said to me, I want you for the next 24 hours, every person you look at where you can, look at them in the eye, not in a creepy kind of way, but just try and get their gaze and just remind yourself that that person is me, just having a different human experience. And that could have been me if I had fallen into this, in those circumstances or made those life choices. It was very profound for me, bro. It was absolutely and I'm not exaggerating. It was pivotal for me. And as someone who's trying to, I mean, the word spirituality gets thrown around a lot, and I don't like to, say, I'm all spiritual. But I'm as I'm getting older, I'm trying to explore that in life and see how can I incorporate that into what I do in my work. And this is where the mentoring side of it comes in. And it's like, how do I, how can I serve, if you will? How can I pay forward? How can I incorporate that without the spiritual, without using all the stereotypical airy-fairy, mamby-pamby kind of things, just in a practical way that people can metabolize and incorporate in the most basic form, just right down to the bare bones type stuff.
I think a lot of people, and this hit me a few years ago. I just kind of call it the randomness of God's blessing. And without trying to get off the rails here, I say, I was born, a white male in the United States of America to two parents who stayed together, who were middle-class people, both educated, college educated, understood the value of education and stressed that growing up. It was a loving household that was not abusive, wasn't exposed to drugs, things like that in the home. I mean, I had this great upbringing and had all the trappings that go along with that, had all the advantages that are built into that. And, I could have been born 500 miles south or 1,000 miles south, I don't know geography of it, but I mean, south of the border, for example, in Mexico, and my life would have been, I'm sure, extremely different and probably not nearly as easy as I've had it. And I think the quicker that we all realize, kind of what you said, that you look at those people in the eyes, that it was some of it's life choices and some of it's the hand they were dealt, that they had I didn't get to choose my parents. I didn't get to choose that who they would be and how they would raise me and things of that nature. Those are things that just happened to me regardless. Just like somebody who's born into a household that's a single parent that's abusive, that's a drug user, and the kid doesn't understand the value of education because the parent has no education. They were dealt that as well. And so it's as I get older, I'll look at people and I see their circumstances. I also take into account, this person probably didn't have a lot of the advantages that I had, that were just born of who I was born to. That was way beyond my control. It wasn't, hey, look how well I chose to make this decision with regards to running my business or how I educated myself or any of those things. These are things that are non-negotiable. They just were handed to me. And it's just randomness. It's like, so I was, for whatever reason, I was blessed with these benefits that really helped me in life. Even when I started my business, I borrowed a little bit of money from my parents. There's a lot of people that couldn't borrow any money from their parents. They don't even have parents or whatever. And so, I think it's really important that when we look at other people that we do that. And if you spend your life looking at that and trying not to be so judgmental of this person because they belong to this different tribe than yours, or they look different than you do, but you understand that you would look exactly like that if you were born and raised where they were, then suddenly you realize you get back to that. Everybody wants the same thing. Doesn't matter how different they seem than you. They just want safety. They just want to raise their kids. They just want to, they want access to the basic. You give people these things, and it's amazing how we all get along in the situations.
Yeah. Well, you're one of those guys who I've always admired for for many reasons, but one of them particularly is you're one of the few, maybe the only one that I could think of off the top of my head right now in our business that has managed to be successful, as in set up his own thing and be self-sufficient, not be divorced, have a pretty balanced life within the family. Your disposition is overwhelmingly positive. You acknowledge, you don't not that you're perfect, but you don't dwell on negative. Anytime you've ever spoken to me about anything that was going on and that was a challenge, you acknowledge those things, but you never, ever, ever spoken a victim kind of mindset. There was this sense of optimism that you always had, and it wasn't a deliriously delusional thing, but just you're always level-headed. Most guys I've known, with drugs, we partied, we divorced, we this, that, and you just managed to sort of go through an industry where being the way you are, you're an exception. I've always admired that about you, man. So, and I think that you say, oh, there's no luck. I think it still comes down to choice. Where you may have been raised a certain way and had some decent cards dealt, but nonetheless, you were never tempted, son. You just,
Well, we all have our failings. There's no question about that. I'm far from perfect. I do think, and I try to teach my children this. I firmly believe in not crying over spilled milk. The old adage. It's just worrying about things or being upset about things that are beyond my control. They're beyond my control. I can't do anything about it. All I can do is deal with it and move on. Let's go. And trust me, I have plenty of times that you haven't been on the phone with me when I've been frustrated and just grinding along. But for the most part, it's like, man, I only have one chance at this. I get about 70, 80, whatever years here. I'd rather spend them enjoying it and being optimistic and ready for the next great thing to come along than dwelling on something that had already happened and it's gone and it's behind me. Doesn't do me any good. It's not going to make me better.
Well, I'm certainly not suggesting you're perfect, but it's I think just compared to but just compared to other guys I know and their life and their story, you've just been able to, again, just with all those attributes that you talk about, that I'm just over the last few years have been starting to actually get myself. That's the thing, isn't it, man? It's you just managed to grasp these concepts earlier and incorporate them, and they become part of your operating system, and that's how you rolled. Yeah.
Well, I wish I knew what to say to that, because I don't. Just like I said, that's who I am, so I don't really know.
No, that was not. I'm just. It's not even a question. It's just simply an acknowledgement. That's all it was, Brad. So, what sort of things you got going on over there at Euphonics right now? Anything that you can talk to us about, or anything that's particularly?
I've got a couple of records that I've done over the summer that are now starting to roll out or have just rolled out, and then a couple that I'm working on that I'm excited about, but I can't really say anything about just yet. But we cut the new Dave Matthews Band record. That was really a cool record to work on. Cut a new record for Rachel Yamagata, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with her or not. She's just amazing singer. She's been around for quite a while now. And I've done, I guess, her last 3 or 4 records, and she's just truly amazing. Working on, I wish I could talk about it. The one I'm really excited about right now is a kind of a big rock record, and it's very cool. It'll be out. We don't have a release date yet, but we're just delivering parts right now. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about that one soon. It's a very cool record.
Do you get out to see a lot of bands these days? Do you find time, or are you able to get time to go out and check out shows?
Not really, for multiple reasons. One of them is most shows are really late, and I'm an early riser. I get up most mornings to work out about 4:30. So, going out to a late show is just it would kill me. But Memphis, despite its sort of history of being a music city, doesn't have a lot of big shows come through here. Most of the big shows that come through actually go to Nashville now, which makes more sense. Of course, it's a larger city and more musically oriented. Mm-hmm. So most of the time when I'm going to shows, I'm going to see bands that like I grew up listening to, kind of that are still out there. Going to see Tom Petty before he passed. I saw him twice in the year before he passed, and or I'll go see the Foo Fighters or something like that. But yeah, I don't go see a lot of shows. They're usually really, really loud and they're really late, and I'm old.
No, you're not old. Get out of here. Actually, the last show that I remember you talking about, you posted up a while back that I went and saw too. Was it Roger Waters when he did his world tour? Did you guys see that show?
Yeah, last summer saw him for that. That was fantastic.
How mind blowing was that?
Do what?
How mind blowing was that show?
That was the fourth time I've seen Roger on the third tour of his that I've seen, and I really honestly wasn't expecting it to be as amazing because the album dropped a couple weeks before I saw him, and I was a little, you know, the album was not what I expected, and so I wasn't sure what to expect. But the show was, it was actually a smaller scale show, you know, than his previous tour, The Wall, which I saw twice. But he's one of the musical geniuses that just I I will go see him in concert as long as he's willing to go put on concerts. I know it's a lot of work for him, but he is remarkable, and so that was an amazing show. Much better than I thought it was going to be. Even.
Well, what really blew me away about seeing him then was, well, obviously the spectacle, the visuals, the band were amazing. The fact that it was not so loud. It was the first time I went to a gig where I actually didn't have to wear earplugs. Yeah. It was just a comfortable level to listen to, and the band were just so tight. It was absolutely flawless in every respect. And I don't often go to a show and leave walking away where I feel, I'm on a higher level. And it was also that, remember when you're a kid, that feeling of when music hits you and it does that thing for you. It was memories of that. I went back. It was like being a teenager again. And that's priceless as far as I'm concerned, because us guys who work in music, it can be easy to maybe get jaded, or because you know so much about the workings of how things work, you become more critical, or you listen to it too analytically and you forget about what it's all about and the experience of music.
Well, I can say this, normally when I hear an album first and then I go see the band supporting the album on the live show, it's a bit of a letdown live because they can't pull it off. Whereas this Roger Waters show, I was a little taken aback by the album because it wasn't sonically what I expected it to be. Then I went and saw the show live, and it like re-energized me listening to the album. So after the show, when I listen to the album now, I enjoy it more than I did before the show. And that's actually really the opposite of what normally happens. Normally you can't wait to get back and hear the studio version because it's like, okay, now this is the way it should sound, but the live version there was so good. They pulled it off and really gave energy to the songs that I almost feel like weren't on the CD in the first place. So yeah.
It's an interesting point you bring up before about, and I found this too, that some bands that I've gone and seen live, and the record experience were in some cases poles apart. And I don't necessarily expect to see a band replicate the CD live on stage, but certainly in terms of just playing and the tightness of the performance, and I think now that's as much as digital and what it can do and the convenience and the magic you can create. I think it's gotten to a point now where it becomes a little artificial, and kids these days. And this is not me sounding like some old decrepit old man here, but the kids these days, get off my lawn. But the kids today are listening to records, and they're used to listening to this very meticulous quantum level of timing and pitch correction. And the records that you and I grew up with, if you were to take a multi-track and there'd be stuff that'd be all over the place, and there'd be nowhere near the same level of tuning and pitch correction and timing and tempo correct and all that sort of stuff. And yet there's magic in that.
Oh yeah, that's where the magic lives. That's why I think a lot of music now sounds great, but it doesn't have the same soul. I think a lot of it gets squashed out. And I mean, you hear kids now, like I hear kids sometimes singing, and they're trying to sing like their favorite artist. And they're like mimicking the auto-tune, like artifacts in their voice, trying to sound like that artist, and they don't even know that's what they're doing. That's all they hear, because they're not used to hearing someone who can actually sing and who can get a little sharp or a little flat for emphasis, which we grew up with because there was no tuning. You could either sing or you couldn't sing. And it's the same thing. We're talking about these live concerts. When I went to see the Foo Fighters, they don't have to replicate the CD, but like you said, they're tight and they can play all the parts. It's not like they had to sit there and like note by note figure out how to play the guitar solo in the studio. They sat down and played what they wanted to play, and then they can do it again later live. And so bands that can do that, that's always a blast to see. But I've been let down a few times recently when you go see a band and it's obvious that that guitar player may not have even played that in the studio. That may have been the studio engineer that went back and played the guitar solo, after they went home that day, because there's no way he played what's on the CD.
Yeah.
And that can be a bit of a letdown, but that's just kind of people have probably been complaining about the tools that we use in audio production since they developed the equalizer, so I guess that's just the way it goes. But I generally prefer music that requires the mastery of an instrument. That's the reality of it, whether it's singing a vocal or it's playing something where it takes 10,000 hours of sitting on your bed playing that guitar or those drums or whatever. And I think that's why I gravitate towards music that generally does that over more synthesized things, because while I'm not saying that synthesized music requires no talent, I just like the stuff that requires that sort of honing of the craft. That really appeals.
Yeah, absolutely. And also an honesty of performance, a feeling, again, that thing that, Joe Punter doesn't necessarily understand or can appreciate a record on a technical level, but they feel it, and emotion is emotion, man. And I think that's a big part of our job, isn't it? Is we're trying to think about what's it like for Johnny Punch Clock, when he hits play, to that feeling. And people do. They don't necessarily have to know how it's all created. But when music is honest, when you hear it and it speaks to you, whatever it is, that's the stuff that I like too. And I don't care whether it's recorded, on an iPhone.
Yeah,
it's
either.
Then listening to something that's meticulous. And I was going to bring up Steely Dan, but I don't want to upset Steely Dan fans because I love Steely Dan for different reasons. But they're an example of one of those bands who are, that could almost be classed as clinical, but yet they're still extraordinary bunch of musicians as well. I mean,
there's soul in their music, but I mean, when I was younger, I remember thinking, wow, this is as close as you can get to a live performance sounding like MIDI, because they were so incredibly tight. When they want to, they can swing. And I went and saw Steely Dan live on their, I forget what the name of the tour was. It was the Two Against Nature tour. Is that right?
I couldn't tell you.
That it would have been in the early 90s, so it was before Two Against Nature. That didn't come out to the late 90s or early 2000s, I think. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I went to see them on a tour because they were never going to tour again, so they did. So we drove all the way down to Houston to see them play, and remarkable live. I mean, just absolute master musicians on stage together. That was a lot of fun, and I own every one of their records on vinyl. I think. I mean, it's like I do like Steely Dan, but the way they played was so perfect. It was a little bit uncanny, what they could pull off.
I notice you got your turntable in the background there, and you often post up your morning listen. So what have been on the platters that matter for you of late, my friend? What have you been spinning?
Oh, most of my collection is probably childhood records. I do buy some new releases on vinyl, but most of them I've got multiple copies of Back in Black, which is, of course, the single greatest rock and roll record ever made.
Yes.
Not even up for debate. It's not subjective. That's an objective fact. But lots of Pink Floyd. The reissues, the Pink Floyd reissues that were done by Guthrie a couple of years ago are just absolutely spectacular. I can't believe the low noise levels and just the overall sonic impact is just ridiculous. But listened to a lot of Foreigner lately. That's one of the sounds of my childhood. And Boston, and every morning I listen to something. I don't always post about it. It's not always vinyl, but that's one of my routines. Is first thing in the morning when I get to the studio, is I'll spend 45 minutes to an hour, kind of going back answering emails, downloading files that clients have sent, for that day's session, that sort of thing. And that's a good time just to let my ears sort of wake up and acclimate, just listen to something, usually something I'm really familiar with that I've listened to 1,000 times. So it just sort of helps me calibrate in a way, I guess. It's a good way to wake up in the mornings, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I still manage to enjoy music for the sake of music. I still think that there is an analytical side that still is there, maybe, because of the work, but I I can say that I still do enjoy music. I know some engineers that, for whatever reason, they love music, they love the work, but once it's done, it's done. And there's not a lot of music done at all. But I don't do a lot of music listening outside of work. But when I do immerse myself in it, and I do get to enjoy the experience.
Yeah, I do a lot when I'm driving. But also, I tell you what, I maybe I've always been this way, or maybe it's something I developed, I'm not sure, but I can completely turn off the analytical aspect and just get lost in it. I mean, just like a fan. I do that quite a bit when I'm listening to, the other day I was listening to Audio Slave, and I was, we were on a plane, my wife and I listened to Audio Slave while we're cruising along on these Bose, quiet earphones that do the noise cancellation, and they're terrible sounding headphones. They're just atrocious. But, within about 5 seconds, your ears kind of acclimate, and then you don't notice how bad they are. But, it's much quieter without the engine noise. And I was just rocking out without even realizing. I had my eyes closed. I was just like air drumming and everything. And she's like, elbowing me like, you're embarrassing me, stop. But I can totally lose myself in the music still. Things like distortions. There was a remaster, Foreigner Records was remastered, which is like their greatest hits thing.
Mm-hmm.
And several of the songs are just completely distorted, like way too loud. I don't know how anybody thought that was okay, to the point that I just skip them. I don't even listen to those. So there's some aspects of it that when I was, 30 years ago, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just rocked along, and I don't know if I would have even noticed it. But for the most part, yeah, I can completely get lost. No problem at all.
What are you thinking about this whole idea of mastering for streaming platforms and whatnot? What's your take on that? You've got a different approach when you're delivering for, whether for Spotify or for, SoundCloud or whatnot. Is there an approach you take?
Right now I'm not targeting Spotify and things like that, simply because if you go back over the last, say, 3 years, the reference standards have changed. For almost each one of those, they've changed them, about every year. So it literally is a moving target. But I think that's a great future. What I'm hoping happens with Spotify and with streaming is that it will eventually encourage clients to stop being scared and making loud records because they're scared. Because the reality of it, artists should be creating art because it moves them, and not always comparing it to other people. But most of the bands that want stuff, or most of the artists that want stuff really loud right now, they want it loud because the other stuff they listen to is loud. They think it has to be, and they're scared. Well, it's not as loud as this. And it's like, I just, that to me, I can't imagine, one of the great classic painters, like finishing something and looking over and go, wow, they have way more red than I do. I better go back and put a bunch of red on this painting. It's ridiculous to think people are compromising their art. But they do. And some stuff sounds great loud. It needs it. It's just gets up in your face. It's perfect. But the number of records that still get cut today that have no need to be 3, 4, 5 dB louder than, but they are, because that's what the client is. They're scared. They compare it to other things. And they go, well, this record's louder than mine. Well, who cares? People have volume controls. They literally don't care. I've never heard of someone taking a record back because it was too quiet.
Yeah, true.
So, but once artists stop being scared and they actually just focus on releasing the best art they can release, whether that's really loud because that's what they want it to be and need it to be for their message, for what they're trying to do, or not, then I don't think any of these things will matter at that point. Then you'll be delivering stuff the way we should be delivering, I think, anyway, and that is a little more dynamic. I'm not one of these purists that thinks you should be able to, we need 20 dB of dynamic range all the time or whatever, but because trust me, I cut plenty of loud records. One of them I cut today was just ridiculously loud because the client, that's what they want, and that's completely fine. It's their art. But sometimes we do these records and you get it cut. It sounds great. Just you send it to them and they love it. They love it. Can we make it 3 dB louder? It's not as loud as this, and it goes from sounding fantastic to really being degraded, just because they're worried that it's not as loud as something else. So I'm hoping that the future for us is that these standards will help back things down and make artists realize that it's not always to their benefit. And like I said, for some it is. For some guys, they make these big records and it needs to be in your face and angry and flat and all these sorts of things. And that's perfect. When that's the case, by all means. But I'm hoping that we'll see in the future overall this pullback as people realize that for streaming services and things like that, it sounds better. And I think subjectively, for the most part, it sounds better.
I agree. And you've actually been, for many, many years now, that's been your platform. You know, you're one of those guys who were right out there. In fact, I loved, I think on the old Pro Soundweb where you cheeky little bugger, you had me fooled because I got roped in, where I think your pseudonym was Does He Squash It? I think it was from memory.
Yeah. Well, I had forgotten about that actually until you.
And yeah, man. So you jumped in there as you know, new member. Does he just didn't even think just the name, you know? It just, and you were you were just causing some havoc in there, and I bought into it, and I was trying to, you know, because you were about, you know, you got to squash her. Yeah, you were just all about loudness and you know, and yeah, all that. You were just yeah, man. You were just giving us the middle finger, and
Yeah,
and it was hilarious, man.
Back when the forum heydays, right? The forums, I guess, have kind of gone away now. I stepped down. I was just talking to my friend the other day. It was, I think, 7 years ago. I stepped down from Mastering Demystified. Now I just couldn't do it anymore. It was too much work to keep up with it. But you know, for a while there, that was a great asset. I learned so much having that Mastering Demystified forum, and you know, not only by explaining things to guys, you know, where you really have to understand it so you can explain it properly, but also, man, there were so many really smart dudes that came on there and just openly shared themselves and their knowledge with anybody willing to learn from them. And goodness, I learned so much running that forum for so long. But yeah, that was a good time. We had a lot of fun back then.
It was a lot of fun, and I was always grateful too. I think we'd all have to take our hat off to Glenn Meadows, because I think it was Glenn's mastering soundboard way back in, where that was the first time that I ever interacted, and I was introduced to that through Bob Katz, who I'd met, and I have to get Bob on one day. He's a fascinating dude. He's just a fascinating dude. He's one out of the box. So you know, Bob cops a lot of flack and ridicule from people, and I can understand why. But if there's one guy that is lives, breathes, and shits mastering, he's one of them, man. He's just such a devotee, and maybe too serious to some, but nonetheless, you got to admire the guy for his passion, and you know, he believes in what he believes in. He stands up. But anyway, Bob got me introduced to that, and that's in fact where I met you and Dave Collins. And again, you know, that I remember ringing Dave, who was back then. I was at absolute nothing. You know, I just started, and I always loved Dave and his style, and I remember just ringing him out or emailing him out of the blue, not expecting a return, but he did. He got back, and we started conversing, and we had a few good laughs, and you know, Dave was I consider again one of my great mastering mentors, and was very instrumental in my career in many ways. And
absolutely did. I remember I was still at Ardent, and I think he was still at A&M back in the late 90s, and I sent him an email, Dave Collins, sent him an email. Just he had said something on the mastering web board. I don't even remember how it started, and I just wanted to send him a thank you, because, or a kudos for like one of the Soundgarden records that I just loved so much that he mastered. And I'll never forget, I sent an email, and like 20 minutes later, I'm in Studio B Lounge at Ardent, and one of the dudes sticks his head out. The phone guy sticks, "Hey, Brad, you got a call on line 2. It's Dave Collins." And I was like, "What?" You know, I couldn't believe he'd looked me up and called me. You know, there at Ardent, and yeah, for quite a few years, Dave was a massive impact on me. He's a great mentor. He's always been extremely giving with his knowledge, and he's very knowledgeable, both about the art and the science, which was great to have, because you know, early in my career, it's easy to get caught up in the art aspect of it and just not understand the science. And he has provided not just for me, but for a lot of people, the young people, that balance of the science behind it, you know. And just because you think you hear it, you can test it and see if you hear it, or things like that, to really keep you from going astray, you know, keep you kind of within the boundaries of where you need to be spending your time. Because if you're spending time adding that 1/10 of a dB at 15K, you know, maybe you ought to realize it's not really worth it, because tenth of a dB at 15K is not going to make any difference if you move your head half an inch. So, Dave was had a massive impact, a very positive impact on my career. No question about it. And I think, as far as I know, I think he has a forum on PRW. So I think he's still doing that today. I don't know. I think forums have kind of died down. I think people are primarily using like Facebook and social media to communicate now. But yeah, he's always been extremely generous. He was a great help.
Absolutely. As far as forums go, I'm with you, man. The only place I really post now is on the Mastering Engineers Worldwide on Facebook, which our friend Crav in Sydney set up. And I don't know how many mastering engineers actually are there, but nonetheless, there's a lot of newbies, aspiring people. And so I just enjoy getting on there every now and again if I feel I have something relevant. I limit my posting to not about EQ, it's just mindset stuff, because I think that there's enough information there from people talking about plugs and the technical aspects and approach and all that. So that's where I feel I can at least provide some value. And I'm enjoying, as an older, calmer dude, being able to participate well, rather than just put up my dukes and want to kick heads. And in my old angry days, I mean, it's funny to reflect on. And I know there are some people that say, oh man, I used to really love, some of those threads, and I'm not particularly proud of a lot of things I said looking back, but hey, that's where I was at that time in life. I feel and think differently these days, but I'm grateful that at least now I can contribute in a more meaningful way. And,
well, you know what? The world needs people that make it a little more interesting, because I tell you what, mastering is it's a really dry subject, to say the least. It's not. Even though those of us who do it, it's not super exciting. I mean, I've made it to a point where I don't even tell people what I do for a living. I don't even ask people what they do for a living when I meet them, because I know the inevitables they're going to, after they answer, is, so what do you do? And I'll have to get into it and describe, this. Oh, it sounds really exciting. It's literally not exciting. I love it. It makes me sick. I can't imagine doing anything else but mastering records for a living. But exciting is not how you describe what it is,
Yeah.
So we need characters, and there were several of you guys that really provided a lot of entertainment, while providing advice and good things like that along with it. But also, made it interesting. It was the forums would have been very boring if we didn't have Tony Mann.
Yeah. Thanks, my friend. Yeah, it still intrigues me how, even though we now live in the internet with so much information, it's still one of those parts of the industry that still doesn't have as much prestige. I mean, back in the day, there was virtually no knowledge. I mean, I tell people that mastering found me because as a youngster, all I wanted to do was be a producer, because I used to look at the record credits and be a real boffin, and I want to mix, I want to produce. So there was no schooling, there was nothing formal back then. And when I came across mastering quite by accident, and the first thing that I saw was how quick the process was compared to being in a tracking session or a mixing session. So for me, I'm not very patient, man. I can't sit down and listen to a kick drum for 3 hours. After 5 or 6 passes of a record, I'm kind of done. So I loved the fact that there was a high turnover and because I love the diverse range of music, but also more importantly, this guy said to me, well, look, there's 400 people outside right now at these tracking and mixing places, all prepared to sell their souls to clean the toilets. No one knows about this. There's a demand for people, because there's all these records being made, but no one, because again, back in the 80s, there's no prestige, no profile. So I thought, I didn't get into this business because I wanted to be a rock star. I just wanted to do something I love and make a living off it. And that was about a lifestyle choice. So, even this day, man, like you, I don't really talk too much about it. People don't understand it. It's still that mystery. But, the black art, I think that's hilarious. I really do.
Yeah, well, that's why I named, if you remember, the forum was called Mastering Demystified. The whole concept was, I hated the fact that there are people, and there are still some today, that want to make it about smoke and mirrors, and they don't want to tell you. They want people to think there's some wizard or something behind this curtain, and it's like, that's just not what it is. I mean, it is a specialized thing. It's different. It's a different way of listening. It's a different monitoring environment, or should be. but it's not rocket surgery. You know, we're not, you know, saving people's lives here. We're just making records sound good and translate well. So it's funny because, you know, I fell into it as well, because when I went to Full Sail, graduated back in the mid '90s, and my goal was to be a mix engineer. I thought, I'm going to be an awesome mixer. That's what I'm going to do. And, you know, I got on at Ardent, and I was entry level, you know, guy taking out the trash, making coffee, that kind of stuff, interning. And they bought a Sadie digital editing system, which was, you know, it was one of the early digital editing systems. Obviously, Sonic had been around for probably a decade at that point, or close to it. But we bought that, and I said, I'm just going to take this machine over. I like digital editing, so I'm just going to. And I became the digital editing guy there at Ardent. And so for probably the first, well, not after the first year, but maybe 2 years in or so, that's what I was doing. I was just doing tons and tons of digital editing. People would get mixes done, or sometimes they'd even import multi-tracks, you know, and we would sit there and do edits and stuff that we couldn't do otherwise, because, you know, they had these big 32-track digital machines, tape machines, but workstations were not common yet. Pro Tools just hadn't made its impact yet. And that just naturally transitioned. You know, it would go, okay, well, you can do 2-track editing. Can you sequence the album for us? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it just sort of grew from there. I had never had any intention of like becoming a mastering guy. It just sort of, I guess, organically happened, you know. And so here we are.
Indeed, we are. And mate, at this point, I'm going to have to we'll have to wrap up our podcast. So, mate, thank you very much for your time. I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed. We have done when you know, when time is permitted. But I've always enjoyed our conversations, and thank you very much for availing yourself. And it's like I said to you, man, like this podcast will just be just like a normal hang time that, you know, but this has been probably one of the longest stretches of time that we've spoken. I said, it'll just be like our normal conversations, man. It's just the stuff we get into. So thank you very much, man. I love you. I appreciate you. You're an awesome guy. You're a great engineer. And thank you for being on my podcast, and thanks for sharing your insights and for your contribution, my friend. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for all the kind words. You made me feel good.
No worries at all, my friend. No need to pitch in your pocket, because I don't need a new best friend. I've already got plenty of those.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, good on you, buddy. Take care. Good luck to you. Best of luck with everything at Euphonics, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good.
Take care of yourself, bro. And there you go, Mr. Brad Blackwood from Euphonic Masters. What a wonderful podcast. What a wonderful man. What a wonderful chat. I had a good time. At least I had a good time. Hope you guys enjoyed yourselves too. I want to just send a quick shout out to the boys at the Cave Hub in Bond Street, Abbotsford. Wonderful place for rehearsals, doing pre-production. It's a venue, it's licensed, and the Farnham boards will take care of you. They're wonderful guys at in Bond Street, Abbotsford, the Cave Hub, good friends of mine. So thank you to those guys, my friends. All right, I'm out of here. As always say, please be nice to each other, but more importantly, be nice to yourselves. I love you fuckers, and we'll catch you on the flip side. All right, see you guys. Bye.